5 years ago, I stood on that stage with tears running down my face, and not a single person clapped. That moment haunted me, not because they laughed, they didn't. They just went silent, like I didn't belong, like my dreams didn't matter. My name is Tammy. I was 23, broke, and terrified. I had this big idea to build an education startup for kids in low-income neighborhoods using gamified learning, but I had no funding, no mentor, and honestly, no clue what I was doing. Hey, if this story grips your heart even a little, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what happens next will leave you speechless. I applied for a chance to pitch it at the Millionaire morning show, hoping, praying for a breakthrough. I got in, but the moment I stepped on stage, I froze. I choked. I fumbled the numbers. I cried in front of investors, millionaires, influencers. I walked off to the sound of my own footsteps. That was the lowest point of my life, but I didn't quit. The next morning, I woke up in a tiny shared apartment in the Bronx. Cold, wet walls. One light bulb above the stove. My phone buzzed. No calls, just a notification. Thanks for your participation. I felt like a joke, but something in me snapped. This cannot be the end of my story, I whispered to myself. I started over from scratch. I studied pitch decks at night, delivered groceries during the day, and built my app on borrowed Wi-Fi from a Dunkin' Donuts down the street. I applied to grants, denied. I pitched to nonprofits, too ambitious. I asked an old mentor for help. He said, "Focus on getting a real job." Still, I kept going. One day, a teacher in Baltimore tried my beta app. She emailed me crying, "These kids are finally engaged. They're learning." That changed everything. I printed her email and taped it to my mirror. From there, momentum built slowly. A small education nonprofit gave me $5,000. I built a new version. Then I won a pitch competition at a local startup hub, $25,000. Suddenly, people listened. Within 3 years, my platform was in 120 schools across 3 states. Kids who were once failing started reading at grade level, some even above it. Still, that one stage haunted me. The silence, the looks. Then one day, I got an email. Subject: Millionaire morning show, return invitation. They were doing a 10-year anniversary show and wanted to invite past visionaries who never gave up. I laughed. Then I cried. 5 years to the day, I walked back into that same studio. But this time, I wasn't the scared girl with trembling hands. I wore a fitted blazer, walked with calm confidence, and when they handed me the mic, I smiled. 5 years ago, I stood on this stage and cried because no one believed in me. Today, over 50,000 students use our learning app across 6 states, and next year, we're going global. The room went quiet again, but not the same silence. Then they gasped. One of the judges, the same one who looked down at me back then, stood up and clapped. "You just taught us all something." The standing ovation felt surreal. I felt seen, not just for the success, but for surviving the silence. After the show wrapped, I stepped off stage and exhaled so deeply it felt like 5 years of holding my breath had just been released. People swarmed around me, producers, former contestants, even a few of the millionaires who had once overlooked me. They all wanted to shake my hand now. I smiled, nodded politely, but in my heart, I wasn't doing this for them. I had already won the moment I decided not to quit. The real moment came 30 minutes later. I was packing up backstage when an older woman approached me. She had on a gray pantsuit, soft eyes behind thick glasses, and held a clipboard close to her chest. "Tammy," she said quietly. You probably don't remember me. I tilted my head. I was one of the floor staff here the day you pitched 5 years ago. After your presentation, you left your notes on the podium. I froze. I kept them. She pulled a yellowed manila envelope from her bag and handed it to me. Inside were my scribbled bullet points, diagrams of the app, and a handwritten quote that read, "Don't build to impress, build to heal." Tears welled up in my eyes. That quote had been from my little sister, Layla. She had dyslexia. She was the reason I started the whole journey. She couldn't read until she was 10, but once she used early prototypes of my game, something clicked. She read her first full sentence using my app. The cat ran fast. I looked up. "Thank you," I whispered. The woman nodded. "You were special then. You're just proving it now." That night, back in my hotel room, overlooking the city, I sat alone on the floor with the envelope on my lap. My phone buzzed endlessly with DMs, new followers, and congratulations. But I ignored them all. I wanted silence, to hear my thoughts, to honor the journey. That's when Layla called. She was 15 now, confident, bubbly, and thriving in school. "I saw you on TV. You killed it, sis." I laughed. I didn't cry this time. She teased. "You sure?" I thought I saw a tear when they clapped. We stayed on the phone for almost an hour. She told me she wanted to help build the next version of the app. Said she'd been learning to code on the side. I couldn't believe it. This was the same girl who once begged me not to make her read out loud in front of the class. Before she hung up, she said something that stopped me cold. "You didn't just build this app for me. You built it for the little girl you used to be too. The one who had to figure it all out with no one clapping." And just like that, I was back on that first stage in my mind, crying, alone. But this time, I was clapping for her. 2 months later, I stood in front of a different kind of crowd, a gymnasium full of kids in Detroit. We were launching the new version of our app, and Layla was by my side, proudly wearing a custom hoodie that said Junior Developer. I told them our story, how a girl who cried on stage came back stronger, how the world might not always believe in you at first, but if you do, that's enough to get started. The mayor showed up. A local tech firm pledged $100,000 in sponsorship, but more importantly, one boy came up to me after and said, "I don't like school, but your app makes me want to learn." That's when I knew. It was never about getting a standing ovation. It was about starting a ripple. 3 days after the Detroit launch, my inbox overflowed. School districts from Atlanta, Oakland, and even parts of rural Mississippi wanted to pilot the app, but there was one email, short and oddly specific, that stood out. Subject: one room, one student, one chance. It was from a woman named Dr. Kendra Muse, principal of a tiny school in a forgotten pocket of Louisiana. She wrote, "We've got 32 kids, only 9 read at grade level, but there's one girl, 7 years old, doesn't talk much, draws stars on her arms every day. If your program can reach her, I'll believe it can reach anyone." That email hit different. I didn't forward it to my assistant. I didn't file it under later. I booked a flight that same night. When I got there, the school barely looked functional. One long hallway, faded motivational posters, a smell of bleach and old crayons. Dr. Muse met me at the front door with a tired smile. "You really came," she said, like she didn't expect me to. The classroom they led me to had chipped paint, 2 broken laptops, and one little girl in the corner, hoodie over her head, sleeves rolled down tight. Her name was Imani. She didn't speak, but she stared hard at the tablet as I pulled it from my bag. I explained the app to her teacher, then crouched down beside her and said, "You don't have to say anything, just tap the stars when you're ready." She looked at me, then at her sleeve, where she had drawn 5 little stars in blue ink. Slowly, she touched the screen. 1 star appeared, then 2, She smiled. By the end of the hour, Imani was reading the words aloud. The teacher started crying. So did Dr. Muse. I held it in until I got to the rental car and just sat in silence, stunned. It wasn't just working in theory. It was working in the forgotten corners, the places most people never go back for. When I returned home, I made a decision. No more just building software. We were starting a foundation, the Ripple Fund. Mission: equip 1,000 underfunded classrooms with tech, training, and access to programs like ours within the next 24 months. The first grant? Imani's school. We set up a local network of teachers in low-income districts and trained them directly. Some of them were retired, some were volunteers. All of them believed again. I began documenting everything on a small YouTube series, from crying to clapping. Within weeks, views skyrocketed. The story of Imani, a silent girl who now reads bedtime stories to her classmates, reached 2 million views. Then came the call I never expected. A producer from the Millionaire morning show again. "Hi Tammy, we want to make your story into a feature segment for our new docu-series. Something longer, something deeper. We think the world needs it." I said yes, but not for fame, not for praise. For the girl drawing stars in the corner, for the girl crying on stage, for the ripple. Because some dreams don't start with applause. They start in silence and echo into something that changes the world. The docu-series crew arrived 3 weeks later. Cameras, lights, interview kits, everything. But I told them one thing clearly. If this becomes about me, we failed. This story belongs to the kids, the teachers, the ones who never got a spotlight. They respected that. They followed me, not just into boardrooms or conferences, but into the real places. The cafeteria turned classroom in Mississippi, the tent school in New Mexico, the after-school program behind a laundromat in the South Bronx. But the most powerful moment came when we returned to Louisiana. Dr. Muse had planned something I didn't expect. She had gathered all the students in the school for an assembly. The cafeteria was hot and crowded. The projector kept glitching. Still, the energy was electric. Then Imani walked on stage. She wore a little blue dress with tiny stars embroidered at the hem. She held a book, The Stars Beneath My Feet, and began to read aloud into the mic. Her voice was small but steady. Every word was clear. Every pause had weight. And when she finished, the entire room stood up. Not just the students, but the staff, the camera crew, everyone. Imani didn't bow. She just looked straight at me and smiled. I smiled back, because I realized something in that moment. The Millionaire stage wasn't the stage that mattered most. This was. The documentary premiered 6 months later. Streaming platforms picked it up. News outlets wrote features. My inbox exploded with emails from schools, teachers, parents, even former students. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Kenya who ran a school out of a shipping container. She wrote, "We downloaded your app through a neighbor's hotspot. My daughter learned to read in English for the first time. Thank you for not giving up." That night, I stayed up designing a version of the app that worked offline, using basic audio prompts and local language packs. A volunteer from Nairobi helped us translate. A retired engineer in Cape Town helped optimize the memory use. By the end of the year, the app was being piloted in 5 African countries. But even with the growth, I stayed grounded. I still visited classrooms. I still handwrote notes to kids who hit reading milestones. I still took calls from burnt-out teachers just needing a voice to remind them, "You matter." One day, during a speaking event in DC, a young woman raised her hand during Q&A. She said, "I was 18 when you cried on that stage. I watched it live, and I remember thinking, she failed. I guess that's what happens to girls like us. But now, I'm building my own platform for STEM education because you got up." I stepped off the stage, hugged her, and whispered, You don't have to be loud to make noise. Just make sure the right hearts are listening. That's the thing about a ripple. You never see the full wave, but somewhere, someone you'll never meet will learn, grow, and rise because you refuse to sink. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a tech summit in San Francisco, a major one, the kind with billion-dollar CEOs, polished panels, and brands with booths that cost more than my old apartment. I almost said no, but something in me whispered, "You belong in the rooms you once watched from the outside." I stepped onto the stage, looking out at a sea of sleek suits and glowing phones. For the first time in years, I didn't feel nervous. I felt rooted. I started with a story, not about business, but about Layla, about Amani, about the little boy in Detroit who used our app to read his first birthday card out loud to his dad. The room went still. And when I finished, something even more unexpected happened. A tall man in the front row raised his hand. His face was familiar. I had seen it before, 5 years ago, on the Millionaire morning show. He was the host who cut me off mid-pitch when I fumbled my financials. Now, he stood up slowly. "I remember you," he said. "You were the one who cried." He paused, then added, "And now, you're the one teaching us how to build legacy." Applause. Loud, honest, undeniable. After the summit, he approached me backstage. "I've hosted thousands of guests," he said, "but I never forgot the look in your eyes that day. I should have seen the fire, not the fear. I missed it. But thank you for not letting that moment define you." I shook his hand, not for validation, but because I finally understood something. Sometimes, the very people who underestimated you are the ones who needed your story the most. Later that month, something wild happened. We got a call from the White House. They were assembling an education and innovation roundtable to advise on equitable tech access in underfunded schools, and they wanted me on the panel. Not because of flashy metrics, not because I went viral, because what we built was real. I sat across from cabinet members and policymakers, telling them what we'd seen. No buzzwords, no fluff, just truth. Education isn't broken, it's starving. For resources, for belief, for access. You fix that, and you change the country. One of the aides pulled me aside afterward. "You didn't pitch like a tech founder," she said. "You spoke like someone who still remembers the smell of underfunded classrooms." "I do," I replied. "I was raised in them." That night, alone in my hotel room, I wrote 3 names on the notepad beside the bed. Layla, Imani, me. Then I wrote one more. You. For the girl still crying in silence. For the teacher thinking about quitting. For the dreamer whose voice cracked the first time they shared their vision. This story, my story, isn't mine anymore. It belongs to all of them, because the ripple isn't finished. It's only just beginning. The ripple took its next form in an unexpected place, a prison. One morning, I received a letter from a corrections officer at a juvenile detention center in Ohio. He wrote, "Your app was never designed for this environment, but we used it anyway, and it changed something. These kids aren't just reading now, they're thinking differently." He included a picture, a grainy, black and white photo of 6 boys, no older than 16, seated in a circle. Each of them held a tablet. One was reading aloud. Another had his hand raised, about to correct a word. That photo floored me. A place built for confinement, now giving way to imagination. I called the officer immediately. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about Deshaun, a 15-year-old who had never finished a book in his life, but cried when he completed one through the app. "You gave him a future he didn't know how to ask for," the officer said. I sat with that, long after the call ended. The next week, I flew out to visit the center, The facility was gray, windowless, and humming with tension. But the classroom? That was different. There was a mural on the back wall, rough but beautiful, painted by the kids. It said, "We learn here, so we don't repeat out there." I walked in. Deshaun was there. He looked at me and said, "I didn't know black girls made stuff like this." I smiled. "We do, and we're just getting started." We piloted a special version of the app just for juvenile centers. No bright cartoons, no silly badges, just powerful stories, real voices, and tools to help them write their own. Within 3 months, literacy rates inside the facility jumped by 43%. But more than that, they started writing their own stories. One boy wrote a poem titled, "I don't know my dad, but I know words now." Another wrote a short story about time travel. His character went back to warn his younger self not to skip school. We compiled the stories and published a small anthology called Voices Behind Walls. Every copy sold funded another facility's access to the program. At the launch event for the book, a woman approached me quietly and said, "My son's in that facility. He told me he wanted to read to me over the phone last week. That's never happened before." She hugged me so tight, it broke something open in me. That night, I called Layla. "I think I found the next layer of the ripple," I told her. She was quiet for a second, then said, "You're not just giving people their voice, sis. You're giving them a mirror, one that doesn't lie, one that says, you are still worth the story." And maybe that's what it all comes down to. Not applause, not stages, not spotlights, but stories, shared, spoken, heard, in places the world forgets. Because once you've been the girl who cried alone, you never forget how sacred it is to help someone find their voice. And when they do, the ripple becomes a wave, and the wave becomes a movement. The movement found its way into places I never imagined, and one day, it found its way back home. I got a call from my old high school in the Bronx. They were planning their 50th anniversary and wanted to invite a few alumni to speak. I almost said no. That place, it held ghosts. The hallway where I got mocked for wanting to start a business. The library where I stayed late, teaching Layla to read while pretending I understood calculus. But something said, "Go, not for them, for her, the girl you used to be." I walked through the same double doors I once rushed through to avoid being seen. This time, I stood at the front of the auditorium. Stage lights softer than the ones from the Millionaire morning show, but this stage felt heavier. I shared everything: the failure, the silence, the tears, the breakthrough. The lives changed, and when I was done, I paused, took a deep breath, and said, "By the way, this school, it gave me my first no, but it also gave me my first question. What if I could build something better?" Then I turned to the principal, who was new but energetic, and said, "We're donating 300 tablets and a full year of teacher training, right here, starting now." The room erupted, not in the performative way, but in the way that told me the past didn't win. After the event, a girl no older than 15 walked up, holding a notepad to her chest like armor. She spoke so quietly, I had to lean in to hear. "My name's Aisha. I don't talk much, but I write. I think. I want to be like you." I knelt beside her and said, "Then do it. But don't be like me. Be like you, the real you. That's where the power is." She smiled and handed me a folded paper. It was a poem, titled "The Girl Who Stopped Crying." I read the first 2 lines and had to stop. My eyes blurred. It was about me, about watching my video online, about believing for the first time that black girls could be both soft and strong, vulnerable and victorious. I gave her my card. "Send me your work. I'll read every word." That promise turned into something even bigger. We launched a new initiative, Echo Writers, a creative writing mentorship program for young girls of color from underfunded communities. Every quarter, we'd select 10 girls, pair them with authors, editors, and educators. Their work would be published online and in physical anthologies, proceeds funding literacy efforts in their neighborhoods. Aisha was in the first cohort, and the day her short story was published, she called me. She didn't say much, just 6 words. "I'm not afraid to speak now." And that's when it hit me. All along, I thought my story started on that Millionaire morning show stage, but it didn't. It started the day I refused to stay silent. It grew when I shared the microphone. It blossomed every time someone else whispered, "Me too." This wasn't just a comeback. It was a chain reaction, one voice echoing into many. And those echoes? They're still growing, still moving, still changing the world, one silent ripple at a time. 6 months later, I found myself sitting in a quiet green room behind the main stage of the Global Education Forum in Geneva. I had just flown in from Bellingham, where we'd rolled out our first pilot of the offline learning kit across 10 underserved communities. I was exhausted, but wired, not from caffeine, from purpose. The forum coordinator peeked in. "You're up in 5. I looked at my reflection, calmer now, older, but still carrying in the same fire I had when I first stepped onto that stage in tears years ago. Only now, the weight on my shoulders wasn't fear. It was responsibility. Before I walked out, I checked my phone. There was a message from Layla, a selfie of her in a lecture hall, wearing a white coat. Caption, "Day 1, future pediatrician in the building." I stared at that photo for a long second, heart full. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out into the lights. The crowd was massive. Ministers of education, UN delegates, journalists, tech leaders. But I spoke to them like I was still in that classroom in Louisiana, crouched beside Imani. I didn't talk about downloads or traction or funding rounds. I talked about her, about them, about the ones with no internet and no lunch, but all the brilliance in the world. I said, if we only build for the connected, the privileged, the already achieving, then we are not educating. We are gatekeeping, and education should never be a locked door. There was a pause afterward, a stillness, then a standing ovation, not because of me, but because something finally broke through. Not noise, not buzz, truth. That speech changed everything. Within a week, I was invited to consult on a new international literacy fund, backed by 3 major foundations. They wanted to scale our model, not just in the US or Africa, but in conflict zones, refugee camps, and post-disaster areas where education is often the first thing to disappear. We adapted fast. We partnered with satellite internet providers, created solar-powered tablets, and developed trauma-informed curriculum overlays. By the end of the year, we'd reached 200,000 new learners. And then came the moment I never imagined. I was nominated for a Global Humanitarian Award. The same girl who once sobbed on live television now being recognized on the same level as Nobel Peace winners. It didn't feel real, but I accepted it, not for the glory, but for the platform. Because each time I stood on a new stage, I imagined the girl watching from a tiny screen, doubting her worth, afraid to try, and I'd speak to her, always. The night of the ceremony, after all the cameras and champagne, I returned to my hotel room alone. I opened my laptop and wrote a letter, not for publication, not for the media, just for me. It started like this. Dear girl who cried on stage, you didn't fail, you began. You weren't small, you were rising. You weren't breaking, you were building. And everything that scared you back then, you've now turned it into light for others. So cry when you need to, but never forget who you are becoming. I hit save, closed the laptop, and slept with the softest peace I'd ever known. I used to think, The worst moment of my life was crying on that stage. But now I know. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. Because sometimes, life doesn't hand you the microphone. It hands you the silence. And what you choose to say or build in that silence, that's what defines you. This story isn't about applause. It's about impact. It's about every quiet kid with a loud dream. Every woman who was told she didn't belong. Every no that taught us how to fight for our yes. And maybe the tears weren't weakness. Maybe they were seeds. And this is the harvest. What about you? Have you ever been told you're not enough, only to prove them wrong? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the ripple someone else needs today. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because here at Fiction Echoes, we don't just tell stories, we echo the ones that still need to be heard.